What's up, guys? MMA Raccoon here. New video for you guys, not picks this time. I'm sure you're all glad I'm getting back to just doing some regular content. About 2 weeks ago, we saw Alexander Volkanovski unfortunately get knocked out by Ilia Topuria at UFC 298. So I'm just making a video for what's next for featherweight division, especially in the UFC, especially because the supposed top contender, Yair Rodriguez, just got submitted last weekend as of this video being made. So I'm just going to go over the state of the top of the featherweight division in the UFC, as well as, what I think should happen next. I'm going to go over all the top contenders, what I think their next fight should be, what I think the UFC might make, things like this. So we're going to start by doing an overview of the top 4 sort of big contenders in this division. Of course, we're starting off with Brian Ortega. He's just coming off with a submission win over Yair Rodriguez, a big victory in Mexico, enemy turf. Has submitted the number 1 contender, basically, former interim champion, in a supposed title eliminator fight. This guy's got a lot of arguments going for him, just mainly in that he won that big fight that was kind of marketed as a title eliminator. I think that there are some problems, though, with him. Mainly that he has been inactive for 2 years. He's very injury-prone, right? So I think the UFC is going to want him to prove that he's going to be able to be active. And also, that guy was getting pieced up on the feet, and he basically won because Yair Rodriguez is the Michael Chandler of 145. He has 0 fight IQ, right? That he didn't take advantage of it when he hurt him, and he hurt him bad. And I guess he's also just not physically strong enough to avoid takedowns, right? I've never been able to see Ortega be successful with takedowns against other guys like Holloway and Volk, so, people always talk about his transitions not being very good. So anyways, obviously, he won the big fight, but I suspect that the UFC is going to want him to win another. Next, obviously, we have Max Holloway, right? I mean, Max Holloway is Max Holloway. They always say, he's the boogeyman in 145, and Volkanovski is the one you sent to kill the boogeyman, right? He beats everybody except for Volk. He's the former champion. He's, in recent times, basically undefeated in that division, except for against Volk. And even, his other losses in featherweight are to people like Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor. First of all, not even 145ers anymore, but second of all, pretty high quality, high caliber opposition. The problem with Max Holloway, of course, is that his next fight is at lightweight. He's fighting Justin Gaethje for the BMF belt. If he loses, he's probably going to be pretty banged up, and also, it's weird to get a title shot coming off a loss, especially one in a different division. But if he wins, then his options are open, right? That could parlay very nicely into a title shot at lightweight against Islam Makhachev. It could, he could defend the BMF belt against Dustin Poirier, against Conor McGregor, right? So I think that his options at this point, he's just got so much of a future ahead of him. Maybe he's not even looking at that 145 title. We know that Ilia doesn't want to fight him. I think that of everybody in this division, he's probably the scariest fight for Ilia. And I think that the UFC wants probably to build Ilia up as a star a little bit before they put him in there with a tough test like Holloway. But I think that there are also some very good arguments for him getting that next shot. We also have Aljamain Sterling, right? The greatest 135er of all time. Yes, greater than Dominic Cruz. I said it. He lost that belt. He's now going up to 145. He's fighting Kelvin Kattar, who is coming off of about a 2-year layoff as well. This is an interesting fight, right? Because you don't really see a lot of these high-level wrestlers like Aljo at 145, right? Movsar Evloev kind of, right? Although that guy kind of likes to stay on his feet. And then, you get the grappler in Ortega, but again, that guy doesn't wrestle, he grapples. So I think Aljo presents some new threats. The big argument against him, of course, is that the UFC hates him for whatever reason. But, they didn't even give him top 5 opponent, which means he's probably, this is the big problem with him, I think he's probably still 1 fight away, even if he wins against Kattar, which I think he will, at UFC 300. But I think that if he does win against Kattar, especially if he submits him, right, TKOs him, does it in spectacular fashion, he could really punch a ticket right at the top. I could see him skipping a line if it's really spectacular, right? There's a story there. So yeah, it's good. And then, of course, our next one is Volkanovski himself, right? Obviously, he deserves an immediate rematch. He's calling for an immediate rematch. Ilia says that he'll give him an immediate rematch, right? I think that the argument against this is simply that he just got knocked out twice in a row, right? Within 4 months. I think that he should, and I think he probably knows that he needs to take time off. He needs to let his chin heal, right? It's not like he's going to have another 5 title defenses if he wins his belt back. So he probably wants to focus on just winning his belt back whenever, maybe defending it once or twice and retiring. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure if he called up the UFC and said the next ones should be me, the UFC would give it to him. I just think that he's smart enough to not do that. And so I think that Ilia's first going to defend it against somebody else. Yeah, so there's also like a top of the division that's not immediately in title contention. We're starting off with Movsar Evloev. This is kind of funny because people kind of talked about him like he was next. If Volk won, he probably would have been next. But, I don't know. People just don't seem too excited about this guy, right? Like, the fight with Allen was a bit embarrassing for him, right? Like, there was the whole thing with the knees. A lot of people thought Allen won that fight. Personally, I scored it to Movsar 2-1, but I also, like, on rewatching it, can score it 2-1 to Allen. But, yeah, like, the UFC just doesn't seem too excited about this guy. He's not super active, right? He kind of got taken to school a little bit by Diego Lopez, even though he won that fight. I don't know why. This guy has no aura, right? Like, usually these guys from the Caucasus, everyone's like, wow, these guys are scary, right? But not Movsar for some reason. And so, just for this reason, like, I think he's kind of earned it. But just for this reason, it weirdly enough, I guess because Ilia won, I just don't think it's going to be him. We also have Sean O'Malley. He's calling for it. Ilia's calling for it. Champ against champ. Super fight in Madrid. Blah, blah, blah. This should not happen. If this happens, it's Mickey Mouse, right? If this happens, I guess it is McGregor 2 or whatever, right? Ilia has a huge division to defend against. So many top contenders. O'Malley has so many top contenders to defend his belt against before he gets a chance to move up. It shouldn't happen. Moving on. Josh Emmett. See, this is interesting, right? Because Josh Emmett was also weirdly in the title picture a little bit before this fight because he's one of the only guys near the top of that division that Volk hadn't beat. It was basically him and Movsar, right? And it was maybe going to be Sterling if Sterling went against Kattar. But now, it's the opposite, which is that Josh Emmett is literally the only guy at the top of 145 who has been beat by Ilia Topuria, right? So even though, that was a spectacular knockout he got over Bryce Mitchell in his last fight, I think he's going to need 1 or even 2 more to even be put in contention, especially because the way that Ilia beat him, just schooling him for 5 rounds, not great. Right. And finally, Yair Rodriguez. This guy losing made me very sad. This is one of my favorite fighters. But, yeah, I mean, I thought that stylistically he was going to be the one to beat Ilia Topuria, like with the kicks and like the movement and the creativity in the pocket. Ilia... if you go back and watch my prediction video, I said that Volk was going to outclass Ilia. Obviously, I was wrong. But I think that Volk, like, at long range and at medium range, was really able to take advantage of Ilia Topuria. And it's just that you can't get caught in the pocket with that guy. And I thought that, like, Yair Rodriguez, obviously, at medium range and at long range, he's better than Volk. And he's creative in the pocket. But I guess he's just not very physically strong. And Ilia would probably take advantage of that because he is very physically strong. Yeah, so I think at this point, he won the interim belt against Josh Emmett. He fought Volk and lost, and then they gave him a title eliminator, right? So now I think he probably has to defend his position in the top 5. So I think he's going to fight down, and if he wins that fight, then maybe you can talk about him fighting up again. Not in a title eliminator, but fight one of the guys lower top 5, and then maybe a title eliminator. I think he's kind of a long way from the title at this point, unfortunately. I don't think he's ever going to get it. Yeah. Barring stepping in on short notice and beating somebody. Okay, so let's go over some matches to make. So this is obviously like a title fight that will happen if Ilia keeps the belt. If not, Volk will fight somebody else. Like, whenever Volk decides to return, he's getting a title shot. He's earned it, right? I don't think it's going to be the next one, though, because of the reasons I said. I think that Volk knows that he has to sit out, and I think that the UFC probably wants to put Ilia against fresh blood. They probably wanted it to be Yair Rodriguez, because there's, like, beef there, and they're both Spanish-speaking, and you put it in Spain, and it's great. But, if not, like, you're going to put Ilia in there against somebody else. Let him prove himself. The rematch will be even bigger. Yeah. So I don't think it's going to be Volk, but it could be, right? Just because Volk basically has the right to assert that. 5 title defenses, a company man, really popular champ, things like that. You could also see Ilia against Holloway, but I just think that if Holloway wins, he has too many good options. And if Holloway loses, then it's not going to be him because he's going to be banged up, right? Because he's fighting Justin Gaethje, who, if you lose to him, you're always going to be banged up. And I think even if Holloway wins, he's winning a 5-rounder with him, and he's going to be banged up, right? So, yeah, like, the way that Holloway gets a title shot here, basically, is winning the BMF belt against Gaethje, calling Ilia out in the octagon, rather than calling out Islam, or calling out whatever, Poirier, or McGregor, or Charles Oliveira, or anything like that. And then going and getting that fight. And if he does take that fight, like, I think that that's a big fight that the UFC likes to some extent, because Holloway's a big name, former champion. Ilia probably likes it because if he wins, it legitimizes his rule. I just think that, like, Holloway probably is somebody who, of all these options, has the best chance of beating Ilia. So, like, I don't think that the UFC wants that. And I think that, again, Holloway just has these options, and his eyes might not be on the 145 belt at the moment. They might be. He's always said that that's the goal, but they might not be, right? And, of course, in this case, like, this might be a situation where Volk wants to sit back, just thinking of the last one, right? Like, Volk might want to sit back because everybody who Holloway might face, or sorry, who Ilia might face, Volk is already beaten, right? So he could just sit back, watch those fights happen, and if someone beats Ilia, then it's like, well, what the hell? I've beaten this guy, give me my title shot, right? So he's able to sit out here. But yeah, so I think Holloway probably just has other more exciting options, but I don't see why he couldn't, win or lose, get that title shot against Ilia. Movsar Evloev also makes sense because I just think he's earned it. It's just that, like, I don't know, the UFC doesn't seem excited about this guy. That's it. Like, I think that they're going to make him fight someone else. Okay. This is, I think, the only 2-way title eliminator that we might see next. That being, like, whoever wins will get a title shot. This, of course, is assuming that Aljamain Sterling gets past Calvin Kattar. I think that, like, both of these guys, the UFC wants to give another fight. You know, if Aljo beats Kattar, it's like, okay, now beat someone in the top 5. And if Ortega, you know, it's just prove that you're going to be active. Prove that, like, you're not going to get totally taken advantage of by somebody who doesn't jump into your guard. And you can't take down at will, right? So I think that, and then this is a good fight, right? I mean, it's a high-level wrestler versus a high-level grappler. Yeah. So I think that this is a fight that will happen, assuming Aljo wins at UFC 300. A one-way title eliminator race we might see is Movsar Evloev versus Josh Emmett. And what I mean by one-way title eliminator is that if Movsar wins, he goes and fights for the title. If Emmett wins, he's probably going to have to fight one other person, right? And again, this is just, you put Evloev against a bigger name, you put him on an even bigger streak, and you just kind of legitimize him being a top contender. I think that this is probably a fight that the UFC is thinking about. Like, I don't think they're going to be having Evloev fighting down in a major way, but I think that they're going to, like, sell this to him as, you win this fight, we're guaranteeing you a title shot no matter who the champion is. Yair Rodriguez, Giga Chikadze, this is, like, a fight that is exciting. They're both, like, high-level strikers. I think the UFC also probably wants to, like, promote Georgia at the moment. Now that you've got Ilia Topuria, now that you've got Merab, right? Like, probably having Giga being a bigger name is cool. And I think that, yeah, like, Giga is moving up. Yair, they're going to want to defend his position. I can totally see this fight being made. I've also heard people talking about Yair fighting Arnold Allen. But I think that Arnold Allen's also going to be fighting down next. Because that's like 2 shots at a title they've given him, or title eliminator they've given him, against Holloway, against Movsar that he's lost. So I think it's going to be Giga. And then finally, Sean O'Malley. Like, this guy's not fighting Ilia. This is like my path to a title for him at featherweight. He's got to beat Merab. If he beats Merab, then he's got to beat Corey Sandhagen. If he beats Corey Sandhagen, and this is assuming he gets past Cheeto, of course. If he beats Sandhagen, I'm assuming at this point that Umar Nurmagomedov is going to be at a high level where Sean will have to face him. And at that point, Ilia's not even going to be champ. Diego Lopez will. And then he can fight Diego Lopez and get submitted in the first round. And that's it. All right, so this is kind of my picture for featherweight. What featherweight's going to look like for the next year or so. Year and a half. Please leave a like if you enjoyed. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Picks coming soon for next week. UFC 299, where Sean will be fighting. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Thanks, guys.